Makamat sind also moralische Zustände, die man durch eigene Anstrengung erreicht, und als Reaktion darauf treten dann hoffentlich auf die Halat, die Zustände, die einem sozusagen überfallen, als eine Art von plötzliche psychologische Erfahrung, Empfindung. Und natürlich in der Tradition des Sufismus wird besonders diese Halat dann gesehen als ein plötzliche, göttliche, etwas Göttliches, das einem im Geist also plötzlich erleuchtet. Und also über diese ethische Spiritualität der Makamat hofft man dann, und das wird ganz interessant beschrieben in diesen Büchern von der alten Sufi, wie dann dadurch auch als Reaktion darauf, also eine Antwort Gottes auf dasjenige, was man aus sich selber nicht probiert zu erreichen, kommt dann diese Abstimmung. Es kommt in die Hal. Hal eigentlich Ekstase, aber Sie wissen, dass auch in Indien Ekstase meist verstanden wird als Instase. Das heißt, also, und wenn man spricht von Hal in diesem Sinne, ist das auch etwas, was innerlich stattfindet, nicht was zum Ausdruck kommt, nach außen Aufregung, auf äußere Aufregung oder so etwas Ähnliches, aber als eine innere Serenität, eine innere Beruhigung, Serenität, ein freudenvoller Zustand von Verinnerlichung. Und das ist eine Methode, die, wie ich sagte, sehr in Hazrats Lehre anwesend ist, aber mehr als Lehre dann als Methode. Die wartet einfach darauf, als Methode aufgenommen zu werden. Aber inzwischen hat es, das ist vielleicht interessant, um noch in diesem Zusammenhang zu erwähnen, vielleicht haben Sie das auch schon gehört, hat Seyr von der Order International, also der Enkelsohn Hazrat Inayat, jetzt ganz junger Mensch, jetzt diese Führung von dieser amerikanischen Gruppe Order International übernommen hat, übernehmen musste vielmehr, hat also ein System ausgearbeitet, das auch wieder beabsichtigt, Menschen, die in der Praxis dieses Lebens tätig sind und doch gerne die Mystik üben möchten, wie kann man das in heutigen Umständen tun? Und natürlich, wir kommen immer wieder auf dieselbe Verständnisse zurück, wenn man, also sagen wir, diese indische Methode ist typisch die Methode der Yogi, typisch die Methode der Buddhisten, typisch die Methode derjenigen Schule, die eigentlich ausgehen von der Weltentsagung. Wenn man sich der Welt entsagt oder in der Ausmaß, dass man sich der Welt entsagen kann, sich zurückziehen aus die äußerliche Welt, da kann man natürlich sehr gut diese ganze Yoga-Methodik und die anschließende Sufi-Methodik sehr gut verwenden. Aber der Sufismus ist jedenfalls prinzipiell eine weltbejahende Mystik. Das heißt also, dass die ganze Dimension der Verhältnisse unter den Menschen, die Dimension der Moral, die Dimension der ethischen Werte, plötzlich eine viel nachdrücklicher Rolle spielen. Nicht? Also gleich muss man seine Spiritualität sozusagen vermischen, zusammen ausüben mit seinem Verhältnis zu den anderen Menschen. Und das wird also in diesem Makalat- und Halat-System sehr radikal ausgeübt. Zum Beispiel, es gibt mehrere von diesen Systemen von Stadien und Zuständen, von Makamat und Halat. Einige sind sehr ausgedehnt, von über 40 von diesen Zuständen. Einige sind ganz einfach etwa 7 oder so etwas. So gibt es eine große Menge von diesen Systemen. Jede führende Sufi hat wohl seine eigene Methodik verwendet. Aber in das meist klassische System, auch schon sehr ausgedehnt, ich nannte Ihnen die Namen schon von Quschairī im 11. Jahrhundert, der hat dann, ich glaube, etwas 40, zwischen 35 und 40 von diesen Stufen, die man durchzugehen hat, hat er natürlich auch der Übung, zentral in jedem Sufismus ist die Übung der Dhikr, der Erwähnung Gottes. Die Erwähnung Gottes, die durch alle Systeme der islamischen Tradition hindurchgeht. Es wird auch rein religiös, kann man diese Dhikr machen, dann hat es auch einen bestimmten Bezug auf die philosophische Unterrichtung und Philosophie, aber dann ganz besonders der Sufismus ist es dann zur Blüte gekommen als die ständige Wiederholung, nicht die dann eine Art von Verinnerlichungsprozess im Gang setzt, die von den Sufi dann ständig immer wieder geübt, ständig wieder zu tieferer Bewusstseinsebene führt. Und diese Dhikr also ist auch Teil von das Makamat-Lehre-System, von dem System von Stadien und Zuständen, die dann von Quschairī entwickelt wurden. Und das Interessante ist, dass gleich nach dieser Dhikr, die also die jedenfalls eine sehr radikale Interiorisierung, also Verinnerlichung von das Geistesbewusstsein bedeutet, gleich die nächste Übung, die darauf ist Futua. Und Futua, das ist ein wunderliches Begriff, das heißt eigentlich Ritterlichkeit. Futua, das heißt also die Edelmut von den Menschen, die in diese Tiefe des göttlichen Bewusstseins eingesunken ist. Wenn er daraus zurückkehrt, ist seine erste Aufgabe sein Verhältnis zu seinen Mitmenschen. Dann muss er zu seinen Mitmenschen von irgendeinem Gefühl von, ja, also Futur, wie ich sagte, bedeutet Ritterlichkeit, von einer Höflichkeit, von einer Hilfsbereitschaft, von einer Unterstützung von der Schwächeren der Gesellschaft und so weiter, muss er gleich das in Praxis bringen. Also das ist ganz auffällig. Und das heißt also, dass für diese nicht weltentsagende Mystik ist diese Art von praktische, auch auf die Gesellschaft abgestimmte Art von geistiger Entwicklung natürlich ganz auch angemessen. Da die ethische Spiritualität als Grundlage von aller weiteren mystischen Entwicklung schon in den Menschen gegeben ist. Und ich sprach gestern schon davon, im Allgemeinen ist das insoweit auch richtig, dass die Erfahrung ist, dass wenn man anfängt mit Mystik, ohne diese Basis zu haben in eine spirituelle Ethik, man eine bestimmte Entwicklung in Mystik schon durchleben kann. Aber dann gibt es einen Schluss, dann geht es nicht weiter, weil da muss man eigentlich wieder zurück zu dieser ethischen Ebene, weil die Bilanz zwischen die geistige Verinnerlichung und die Haltung, die man als Mensch nach außen anzunehmen hat, sehr eng miteinander zusammenhängen. Und Sie wissen auch, dass bei Hazrats Lehre, ich habe das auch schon mehrmals erwähnt, dass bei Hazrat alle Arten von geistiger Erleuchtung, geistiger Erfüllung, Gottesbewusstsein, die tiefsten Errungenschaften der mystischen Entwicklung, dass bei Hazrat immer diese Ausführungen darauf auslaufen, dass er sagt, warum sollst du das alles mal tun? Damit, dass du deine Mitmenschen unterstütze oder damit, dass du deine Mitmenschen das Leben erleichtere. Nicht? Also immer geht es nicht weiter nach der metaphysischen Realität, nach den mystischen, es geht nach dieser unserer mikrokosmischen Welt zurück, nicht? Also, und was Hazrat Inayat in seiner Lehre nennt, Perfection. Er verwendet das Wort Perfection, also Vollkommenheit, sehr häufig, aber Perfection ist für ihn Vollständigkeit, Vollkommenheit, komplett zu sein. Und also der Mensch soll ein komplettes Mensch sein, komplett in diesem Sinne, dass sein seelisches Dasein, sein moralisches Dasein seines Herzens und sein Geist alle zusammen in den Menschen funktionieren. Dass all diese unterschiedlichen Gebiete, Körper, Geist, Seele, also Körper, Geist und Gemütsseele, dass die alle drei eigentlich möglichst vollendet in das Leben des Menschen zum Ausdruck kommen, in eine Bilanz von diesen drei Elementen. Und das macht der Mensch ein perfekt, er sagt ja also ein vollkommenes, ein komplettes Mensch. Also da sehen Sie wieder, wie stark diese Art von Sufismus auch diese Dimension des Gewissens, der Verpflichtung zu den Mitmenschen mit sich führt.
And always, why develop that personality? Of course, in the first place, in order to communicate with your fellow man, in order to serve your fellow man, that's a very important tenet, very important aspect of personality, to communicate with the other, to sacrifice for the other, etc. But at the same time, also to have something to outgrow. As a human being, you always need some further goal to reach. And the human being, going through the different stages, in his young age, the emphasis may be on his physical existence, but then it becomes his intellectual existence, maybe then his emotional existence, his existence of feeling life. But beyond the physical, beyond the psychological, there's, so to speak, the third story of his house, let us say, which is the life of his soul. But to reach that, you also have to first complete the other types, complete your ground floor of physical being, complete your first floor of the mind and the heart. Then Inayat says, then, well, you see, the heart is the depth of the mind is the surface of the heart. But both the intellectual element and also the emotional element of the mind are developed in acting through the body. So the mind and the body sort of really create your own personality with its emotions and with its thoughts. Heart has its own autonomy, so to speak. Its faculty of loving, its sense of beauty, a sense of the inner realities of life. And so the heart already looks in two directions. It looks to the mind, it looks to the body, but at the same time it looks to that further third story of the human being, the soul. It opens up to the life of the soul. So the completion of every stage of this life, physical, mental, the heart's life, the soul, is essential for the fulfillment of the next stage. Yeah. The sense of beauty as such already raises one beyond the narrowness of one's external self, because you contemplate each to which you can reach out. And by the very joy of reaching out to that which you experience as beautiful, already one's personality is, so to speak, expanded and deepened and getting a further element of enrichment. Of course, with him, it is always with Inayat start with very simple things in order to come to the very profound ones. That's another thing. He very often in his teaching, he is almost playfully light in what he says in order to reach something very profound. So, out of personality, he begins the first thing, look at creating a kind of sense of humanity in yourself. That's the basic thing. Create a sense of humanity and develop the humane qualities of the personality. How do you develop that? Whatever you do in life, however you are active in life, try to develop a love of beauty in whatever sense. Try to love, as I said, the beauty of nature, or the beauty of any form of art, or indeed the beauty of contemplating certain aspects of science, and whatever it be, but contemplate something which you can experience for you, for your taste, as something beautiful. Because that will already kind of stabilize and develop your sense of being and expand your sense of whom you are, of the personality you aim at becoming. So love of beauty is a very first thing, and everybody has some kind of taste. You have, as a human being, you have a kind of taste, a kind of intuition, which something you grasp intuitively as something which you can relate to as you find really beautiful. At whatever stage of development the person is, something will be there which appeals to him. So cultivate that sense not only of your concerns and your material interests, but alongside them, not that there's anything wrong with them, but supplement them by something which is beauty, which develops that sense of beauty in you. And so, as I said, there is that mind and heart, that relationship of the mind and heart, the second story, so to speak, of the house of the Sufi, and they have to interact with one another. And then, in that same context, he says, because he always, wants to bring you something light when he speaks something very profound. He wants to bring you something of a certain lightness of touch as well. That's typical for him as well. And so he said, you see, every soul has a sense of beauty. Every soul has to be an Apsara in Indra's court. And don't think that you can be a bystander, that your soul can be a bystander there. No, you have to dance as well. You have to dance too, as an Apsara in the court of India, to have that sense of beauty of divine reality. So the first thing is that sense of beauty. Then the second thing, which he finds extremely important, develop a sense of gratitude, of appreciation. In other words, that's again something which transcends your ego awareness, because by gratitude, by appreciation, you create an accommodation in yourself regarding somebody else. There are all these people who always want to be critical of somebody else. No, begin by appreciation, begin by gratitude. So look at beauty, look at, develop gratitude, appreciation for everything you can find in life to regard as a cause for that gratitude, among you, from your fellow man, from circumstances, from conditions, whatever. Then there is, of course, to check impulses, to control one's impulses. And that's what he calls turning a man into a gentleman. Now, I don't know how you would put that in the female, but anyway, in those days that was not much a problem because man included everybody. So turn man into a gentleman, because gentleness, he says, gentleness is the principal thing in the art of personality. Because that gentleness teaches you consideration for another person. And so that's what he recommends. And that section, he concludes by the words, how rightly the distinction has been made in the English language between man and gentleman. So that is what he says about that checking of impulses, controlling oneself, that one should never hurt anybody by any word or any expression or any behavior. Don't hurt any of your fellow men, not even those closest to you, and certainly those who are further away. Don't hurt another person. Then, of course, there are different other of these elements. One is, don't try persuasiveness. Don't try to impose your opinion, to persuade another person of your opinion. No, don't do that. It's much better if there is an issue of that kind, rather take back your own aspiration. Rather, do not impose your ideas on the other, but avoid persuasiveness of any kind whatsoever, even at the sacrifice of your own desires. Another thing, what he brings up then is, there is in the human being what the Sufis call kibriya. And kibriya really means vanity or pride or conceit. And then he said, well, you see, that kind of kibriya, that kind of vanity, of course, it's something which you would like to overcome. But it's at the same time something you will never overcome, because that's simply part of the human ego. The human being has that sense of vanity in it. So it is not a thing you can root out or you can change, but you can develop it. You can develop it to something that, you say, make it reincarnate as a plant of desires. So yeah, the ego, it may be the ego, but that ego is also related to the soul. It's related to the divine spark as in the human being. So you have to accommodate, to allow that, that kind of vanity to develop into something which is beyond pure ego satisfaction, let us say. So that's quite a subtle question, but it is something which he finds very important. Again, a thing which you find in Inayat repeatedly, even one's humility can become one's vanity. So he said, well, you know, it's always there. It's always there. It's because it is that sense of I which is simply inborn in the human being and which ultimately is maybe a divine quality. But if that is so, make it a divine quality and abandon those outward kind of vanities which are really nothing more than just feathers in the air. But there is something which you have to recognize. You can never say that you have really conquered it all. You're bound as a human being to your physical and mental being, but just be aware of it and try to have that quality deepened and refined and further developed towards a sense of divine fulfillment. So that's the kind of thing he says about it. Well, then, of course, another thing, and there again you see how strongly this is focused on the development of the human personality, the breeding of the single human being. And that's why I think it's worthwhile nowadays, where all these things generally tend to be very lax in many different societies, especially here in the West, of course. Then he says, one other aspect which you need is self-respect, is dignity, but at a proper time. Again, it is something which you have to maintain. You have a certain dignity. You certainly need a certain self-respect, but again, in a proper time. Don't use that against others. Use it to harmonize with others. Use it to be one with others. Don't use it to set yourself off as from others. So to him, again, that was a very important aspect of life. And then he says, what is nobleness of character? What is nobleness of character? It's the wide outlook. The wider the outlook of the being, that is the nobleness of the human character. Wideness and depth of the outlook. And it will be no surprise coming in this whole series of ideas of how the human personality will be developed. Another thing, he says, manners and qualities. Those manners which a person has, the qualities which he displays, which are an outcome of consideration, an outcome of that sense, how do you deal with others in a proper way, which he considers extremely important in the development of the human personality. And then of thoughtfulness and consideration and a certain economy in expression. To have a measured mode of expression, he says, is also a form of modesty, and at the same time a way in which whatever you express becomes all the more effective. He said, as you say, that they are very much focused on the development of the human personality. As one starts to take action in life, but it is always then it's something what we would call the objectivity. But Inayat here calls it, in this particular context, he calls it an awakened sense of justice. Because that's part of the human personality, to have an awakened sense of justice and the possibility to qualify things. And he says that is a way of making the soul alive. Justice means unselfishness, taking away your judgment, because you're always related, neither to be kind of prejudiced about something which you don't agree with, to be prejudiced about an opinion which you don't like, etc., etc. So try to gain a sense of justice through unselfishness, and practice it upon yourself. Practice it upon yourself, that justice, that fairness, and as I say, to reach precisely what we modern terms called objectivity. Be objective in your dealings with yourself in the very first place. And then,
when you say objective in dealing with yourself, do you mean being honest with yourself about your own, faults, not just your strengths? Would that be an example?
Exactly. It's that ability to be objective about yourself, to have a certain practice, the justice, to have a certain fairness, etc., and really to yes, for the sense of justice, you have to take back yourself a bit. People are unable to take themselves, but they're constantly in a subjective opinion about themselves, mostly very emotional as well. And so that whole idea of being objective is not there. So that's for him a very, very important thing to be.
You know, it's very interesting you say that, because you share this quality of justice in a broader sense, because typically we think of justice today in the modern world in terms of certain, you know, social values that we, you know, stand for, that we believe in, that you should not steal somebody else's property, you should treat everybody equally regardless of race and gender. You know, we think of that as justice. But you're saying there's another kind of just like subtler form of everyday, personal, intimate kind of relationship that you have with justice, which is that, are you being just? Are you being objective? Are you being balanced? Are you eliminating the, you know, the fogginess in your vision to see things in a clear mental light? Wow, that's a really powerful rethinking, you know, of what justice really is.
And he really goes so far that he says that is really, this is what makes the art of personality into a reality, because it's the secret of the soul's unfolding. So that's really going very far. So the secret of the soul's unfolding is, in fact, to have that sense of, well, what he calls that sense of justice, that sense of objectivity.
That's really powerful, really beautiful.
And of course, sooner or later, inevitably, when Inayat discusses something, you will come to music. So what does he say as another block in this series? He says, the art of personality is like the art of music. It is all ear training and voice culture. And he says, to become refined is to become musical. The inward art of refinement, the outward refinement is meaningless if it not prompted by an inner impulse towards beauty. So that outward, you know, etiquette, these forms of this is just to show, they have no value, of course. But if it is an inner impulse towards beauty, then what is expressed in the form of beauty, of musical sense, that is a certain refinement which any human being has to cultivate himself in relation to everybody else.
Yes, I find this really a wonderful metaphor. You know, the idea that you're saying music and the sense of ear training you need for music.
Yes.
You know, one can look at that as your relationship with life, I guess, and with your interactions with people, that, you know, can you tune in to the particular chord that is being struck or the note that is being struck, and, you know, what is the feeling that they're going through, what is the thought they're going through, and how do you then need to respond? Is that, I mean, that's what I was gauging from that.
Yes, exactly. Ear training and voice culture. How do you perceive the other person? How do you express towards the other person?
Yes. It is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. One of the things I've seen, for example, is that some of us, we get too caught up in the idea of just trying to understand what is right. And then as long as we feel we are in the right, we just need to express it and say it. And it's a great like step in the maturation of our own personality to actually recognize that our responsibility ends not just merely in knowing and saying what is right, but in knowing how to say it, when to say it, to whom to say it, how much to say it.
Exactly so. He says, never throw truth on a person's head like a stone.
Yeah.
People who want to, they think they're right, they throw something at you as if they throw a stone at you. Well, that's not the way of being right. That always is that kind of delicacy of the having a sense of how that other person is attuned and attune into that person's mode of understanding and of acting. So for him, that's again a very important thing. And then finally, among these 11 blocks, which we mentioned in your program also, that then he said the very principal thing in the art of personality is a friendly attitude. And that again is a thing you find again and again in so many of his lectures, your attitude towards others. What is your spiritual development of your mind, of your heart, of your soul? What does all that mean, that development, if it was also to have that relationship to your fellow man? To remind, if you discover in your mystical experience something of the divine spark in the depth of your inner being, in the depth of your soul, then recognize that every human being has that divine impulse which gave him life. The divine impulse which is the origin of all human life, all existing, all manifestation, is that something of a kind of impulse which you cannot really analyze, which we see is there. There is that impulse of life, and that impulse of life in everything in manifestation is in particular, of course, present in every human being, and in every human being, we call it that divine spark in the inner being of man. Realize that, and therefore, towards every person you meet, have a friendly attitude and feel about people with a friendly attitude as much as you possibly can, because there is the kind of spontaneity. There's that tendency to give to the other one's understanding, one's fellow feeling. That, he says, is the fulfillment of this development of the human being. And then, of course, there he brings up these ideas of dharma and adharma, consciousness of one's obligations towards others. Your dharma is your to others. If it is not there, then then it is adharma. Then it is not. It has not that sense of duty which you have to your fellow man. Duty, but in a very sacred sense. Of course, dharma means, of course, it is in a very spiritual, religious sense. It is that or sacred obligation.
This idea that everyone has a divine spark, and that everyone means that even those people that you feel like they don't get it, they're far removed from you in terms of their values, etc., etc. We're living in a time in society where, painfully so, there are so many divisions. And this notion that can we approach every conversation, every individual, every interaction from that place of deep faith that there is a divine spark within this person, and part of my goal is to find a way to draw it out. I just find that really, really rewarding and inspiring. There's something I was reading again in the book by Hazrat Inayat on personality, as you're saying, on attitude, where he says the best opportunity that life offers is to get all the good from every person.
Yes, exactly.
And that opportunity is lost when you start seeing the bad side and overlooking the good. But if we saw some good, we don't have to see everything good, but if we see some good in every person, we can take it and collect it. And that is the way that we appreciate, that person, we come closer to that person, but we also become richer and richer with beauty. And in the end, that beauty so collected results in a beautiful personality. I love this idea that what he's saying is that this is not just a discipline that you have in order to respect other people and to be good to other people. Actually, it comes back to you, because when you start borrowing from the goodness in everybody, you start becoming a beautiful painting. Something like that. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. I guess to establish that kind of circulation among people, even if a difficult person, just remember there must be somewhere something which you can communicate with, which you can draw out of him. And that is a kind of service to that human being as well, to the other as well.
I mean, what could be a practical first step that we can take if we aspire to really advance this art of personality? Can you guide us? As you said, he would have a very, I forget the words you use, but something like a light touch, a very kind of gentle, simple, small little something to start people, so could you give us an example of what something like that could be for us?
Yes, well, they said that the gentleness of character, that's very important to him. But at the same time, try to train yourself in the first place to look what beauty can you identify? What beauty can you identify in your surroundings, in your fellow man? Something which you can relate to in the sense of, so that's a way to start. The sympathy with everyone, that's an ultimate fulfillment. But it already starts with looking at developing a sense of beauty in oneself. Maybe it's not always easy to start with his fellow man, but one can start with some sense of beauty somewhere. And that will expand once that sense of beauty is there. That's the very first thing really he says. And there is the art of being able to love beauty. All right, and that will expand wherever it begins, but it will extend in time when it really is expand into, well, relating to one's fellow man as well. not only to those one loves, but even with those with whom one has maybe not a good relationship, or when we have no relationship at all. But something like this will establish that kind of relationship with your fellow man in general. Seeing the good.
Yes, wonderful. I'm taking a quote from the book to build on what you just said, sir. And you know, he's saying, mistake is in the nature of the human being, but try to make it less and less.
Yes.
You know, there must be the tendency to making fewer mistakes. The
Yes.
more one alters, the more there is a tendency to alter, and the more one keeps, the more there is a tendency to keep.
Exactly.
And so it's this notion of just small steps that become big leaps over time.
Yes. And also never be too intimidated when you fail or when you fall. Failing and falling is natural for the human. Don't be too dramatic about it. Of course, get up and go on, and certainly by all means, but do not, I mean, what you sometimes find in certain very religious communities, they are overcome by sinfulness, how very sinful they are, and all that kind of thing. Well, that's a kind of egoism as well. You are not going to be relieved out of outward egotism if you say how very sinful you are. Forget, of course, acknowledge your mistakes, learn from them, but feel that from any failure or any fall you have learned, and so with that learning you can go on again and leave it behind you.
Yes. You know, there are very powerful lessons here in what you've shared, not just for our individual journey, but I'm also proposing that there are lessons here for our journey as a family, for a journey as a community, for a journey as a nation, and for a journey as an organization. Let's say if we are in business, this idea that we have an ideal point that we use as a North Star about the kind of values we want to assimilate and practice, the kind of people we want to be, the kind of culture we want to be. But we also have this very human acceptance that we are not there yet. And that we can take small steps towards getting there. And be honest with ourselves each time we fall, that we have fallen. And we will learn from this. And we will strive on. You know, and if this idea could be part of our national consciousness, if this could be part of our family consciousness, a parent apologizing to a child about a slip up in how they acted in a certain way, a president apologizing to a nation about a slip up in how we acted in a certain hour, a CEO apologizing to the organization that we are human. This is the ideal point. We all agree on it. I have failed in this regard, but I'm acknowledging it, and I'm going to strive to move on in a different way. I wonder what kind of a world we could create.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's very much a point indeed. And relating to that, there is one thing which he emphasizes also very much. All these values, you develop your values not only in spiritual life, but or even in business life, even in life in the world. Don't think that you just abandon that or you don't become conscious of that. He says, for instance, if you allow, I'll read two short passages of his about this. That he says, the real mystic should have just as good qualifications for business, for industry, for social and political life as the materially minded man. The mystic should be a wonderful scientist, an influential statesman, an inspired artist. And then he says, I don't like it when people tell me, you are a mystic. I thought you would not take notice of this or that kind of worldly thing. Why should I not take notice of it? I take notice of every little detail, although every little detail does not occupy my mind so much that I don't take notice of anything else. But so, and then again he goes on to say, those who evolve spiritually only become one-sided. They expand only the inner consciousness and not the outward one. They may become unbalanced. Maybe spiritually they have extraordinary powers, but if they have no balance, what is it? If that is the understanding of the world, we should be most conscientious in order not to give the world a wrong impression. And that is the point what he makes. If we have a profession, if we are in business or in industry, we should do it fully, proving to the world that we can be as practical as everybody else, and also economical, regular in every way, systematic, persevering, enthusiastic. All these qualities we must show and at the same time evolve spiritually. But it is these qualities which will give us the proof of our spirituality.